Hi, everybody. I was for keeping the bar open during the lecture, but Susanna overruled me. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. Gulf Copper is a shipyard located in Galveston on Pelican Island, and we've actually been in business for 75 years, and this is definitely one of the most interesting projects that we've ever done. But there's a big, nice picture up there of the Battleship Texas, but really the story starts before, and I want to share what led up to getting the Battleship in Galveston on our dry dock. This picture is the night that we took it out of the water, late August of 22. Hopefully this works and I can run through these. A little bit of a background on the Battleship itself though first. So launched in 1914, served in both World War I and World War II, the only battleship left in the world that did that. It was decommissioned after World War II, became a museum ship up at the San Jacinto battlefield. And over the years, there was a lot of deterioration to the steel. Steel in salt water tends to corrode. And the damage had progressed so much that it was leaking as much as 2,000 gallons a minute. There were extensive repairs made to stop that, but ultimately it needed to be taken out of the water and onto a dry dock, but they didn't have the funding. So in 2019, the state of Texas legislature granted funds for the transportation, dry docking, and repair of the vessel. Great news. Unfortunately, it wasn't easy to find a dry dock large enough or that was available to do the job. The Battleship Texas Foundation, along with their consulting engineers, actually came to Gulf Copper and said, hey, you're a dry docking company. Why don't you dry dock this thing? We said we'd love to, but we don't have a dry dock big enough. We had one, but we had just decommissioned it. So the foundation and Valcor, their consultants, went all over the world, ultimately looking for a facility big enough, and they couldn't find one that was either large enough to hold the battleship or had enough availability. So they came back to us and said, hey, we've got a great deal for Gulf Copper. We have found a broken dry dock down in the Bahamas, and we want you guys to go down there, buy it, fix it, make it seaworthy, tow it back to Galveston, and then you can do the Battleship project. And so ultimately that's what we did. And so the next slide is a little bit of background on this dry dock. So if you look in the bottom of the slide, it says Grand Bahama Shipyard, and that dry dock is 900 feet long, has a capacity of 82,000 tons. In technical terms, that's a lot. And so it was owned by Royal Caribbean, Carnival, and the Grand Bahama Shipyard. They did cruise ship repair down in the Grand Bahama Shipyard. They made a decision to put a heavier ship on the dock than it was rated for, and unfortunately it didn't go well. The dock broke, it cracked lengthwise the full 900 feet, and the cruise ship was taken off the dock, sent to Spain to be repaired. The dock was scuttled. It was just going to be cut up for scrap. So this is what it looked like when the accident happened. It's a Oasis of the Seas, Royal Caribbean ship. Oh, by the way, it's not supposed to look like that. That's not part of the attraction. So it's hard to imagine, but nobody was killed in this accident. The crews stay on board during a repair. They don't put them into a hotel. So the ship was removed from the dry dock, and but this crane you see in that slide, because of the crack, the crane ended up falling into the cruise ship, and that slide there is the crane falling onto the fantail of the cruise ship. As I said, amazingly, nobody was killed. 8 people were injured, but none of the injuries are serious. So again, the dry dock is scuttled to make the repair of the cruise ship possible, and the dry dock is cut in half as part of the salvage process. So I have a little cool laser thing here. So this is the dry dock. They've cut it in half with a huge chain, and then they're just floating it up, and they're going to bring it over here, and then they're going to cut it up for scrap. And right about now is when Gulf Copper got involved. So we bought this new to us, wonderful dry dock. And you notice it's not on the nice part of the Grand Bahama Shipyard. It's an unimproved section, and all this scrap is the other half of the dry dock that used to have a wing wall like this. It had already been cut up for scrap. So we bought this half. And this half is about 450 feet long and large enough to dry dock the Battleship. Of course, to make it a little more challenging, it was done during COVID, and we also had a little bit of trouble financing it all, so our bankers are also here tonight. Thank you, Vic. They're paying the bills, I promise you. It's all good. And but honestly, we bet the farm on this. This was a huge risk for us to go down there during COVID with uncertain conditions. The lead times on steel, on electrical equipment was really, really difficult to deal with. So this is the before process. And we brought in workers, our own workers. We have an operation down in Mexico, also our local operation, and equipment from all over, and we got it done. The challenge, though, was by the time all this came together, we were up against another deadline. When the state of Texas gave the money for the restoration of the Battleship, they put some covenants on it. And one of them was that all the money had to be spent by a certain date. And by the time we got down there, we got the sale. This was flagged to the Bahamas. We had to reflag it, not an easy thing to do. There were all kinds of things that were getting in the way. By the time we got it back to Galveston, we were almost out of time to spend the money to repair the project, and the state said if you don't spend it by a certain date, we're taking it back. So there was a little heat in the room, I think you could say, with a fair amount of understatement. So a few shots of this restoration. So this is what it looked like up close. And I mentioned before that when the cruise ship was on it, it cracked lengthwise. The crack ran all the way here. So this is this crack. This steel was 10 foot wide and it was compressed to 3 to 4 foot wide. And that next slide is a close-up of what the steel looked like. That, again, it's not supposed to look like that. It's supposed to be nice and flat like this. So I'm going to run through these quickly. This is the before. This is what we inherited and had to repair. So we started cropping out all of that bad steel. So going back, this is a before, and this is an after of getting it ready to put new steel in. So we actually bought surplus steel from the other side of the dock that was being scrapped to save time and repurposed it to use to put in those bulkheads and frames. So that before I showed you it's all crinkled. That's a technical term, crinkled. And then after we cropped it all out, and then here's new steel going back in, getting the ship, the dry dock, stable enough to have a marine surveyor sign off and say it's seaworthy and you can tow it back to Galveston, and then begin the project of restoring the Battleship. So a few more shots to run through, just to give you an idea of the scope of the work, just to get the dry dock ready to go from the Bahamas to Galveston. The before shot, again, this is after the chain had been used, huge chain to cut it in half. Obviously, we can't tow it in the ocean like that. It would sink. So the before and then the after shot, which I think got left off, but I'll find it later. So here we are. We have the towing chain on, and now we're towing it out of the Grand Bahama Shipyard and up to Galveston. Now the Battleship project can begin. Now, I'm not going to give you the other half of the story, which is just to get it out of San Jacinto safely and down to Galveston. That was a whole nother battle that was going on in parallel to getting the dry dock ready to go. Okay, so now we have the Battleship. It's coming down to Galveston. We're going to put it on the dry dock. What are we supposed to do? Well, we're supposed to not have it sink, number one. And so the problem was the steel had deteriorated so much. There were holes everywhere, and it wasn't stable enough to tow down to Galveston. So the decision was made to add closed cell foam to many of the tanks that were leaking to make it stable enough to tow down to Galveston safely. So dry dock it, pressure wash all the marine growth off, remove the closed cell foam from these tanks. I'll show you some great pictures of that in a minute. Crop or cut off those corroded tanks, rebuild them, repair the hull, rebuild the torpedo blister tanks, double, which means layer, new layer of steel over the other parts of the steel that might be leaking, and then blast it and apply a new marine epoxy coating. So that's what we were tasked to do. So the dry dock itself needs to have blocks set because the Battleship sits on these blocks so you have some room to work underneath. So we pre-position these blocks, and that's an overshot of all the blocks the Battleship will sit on. 157 of them, they weigh 4,000 pounds apiece. The dry dock, or the Battleship itself has a 30,000 ton weight. It's a heavy vessel for its size. It's a warship. Lots of armament, lots of heavy steel to protect itself in battle. So this is before the battleship is coming down, and then we start to flood the dry dock. We're going to submerge it. The battleship has to have water over the deck of the dry dock to be able to come on board, and then we pump out the water, let the blocks touch the bottom of the battleship. We check it with divers to make sure everything is good, and then we pump it the rest of the way out. So this is on the way down. The battleship is coming down from San Jacinto. We're going down over at Gulf Copper. Now we're fully submerged, and here comes the battleship into the dry dock, and it's pulled. Now it's inside the dry dock, and we're getting ready to pump the water out. And another view of the bow, and you can see here, these are the wing walls of the dry dock. So there's 30 feet of water here over top of the pontoon deck to allow the battleship to come in. Now we pumped it out, and those same blocks that I showed you a few slides ago are right here. And the dry dock, remember, we had it submerged to here. I'm going to back up a step. So you see the top of the wing wall is right here, and the water level, that little spot there, kind of where it goes from white to some dirty white, and then that right there is this spot right here. So the water was up here because the battleship has a 30-foot draft approximately. So now we've taken it out of the water, and we're going to begin to investigate, what is the condition that we're finding. We knew that everybody knew that there was damage and that there had been repairs that had been made, but until we can get it out of the water and start to investigate further, we found some new things. So the first thing we did, pressure wash all the growth off. Your marine growth is not unexpected. And then we began the first of the tough projects, which was all those tanks. They're called torpedo blister tanks. I'll tell you what those are for in just a minute, but those are the ones that were leaking the most, and they were filled with thousands and thousands of gallons of expanded closed cell foam. So we cut a hole in the metal to get exposure. This is closed cell foam running from this line all the way down to the bottom, the full length of the ship, port and starboard. So altogether, when we removed the foam, because we had to repair this foam was done as an interim step to stabilize the battleship and stop it from leaking and be able to be transported safely to Galveston. But all of this steel had to be removed and replaced. So one of the challenges, though, in a shipyard, typically, when you are going to take off a piece of steel, you'll get a cutting torch and you'll crop or cut it off. Couldn't do it here because this foam, when it is heated, it's flammable. So pretty high maintenance customer said, you can't burn the ship down. And so that was out. But more importantly, from a safety perspective, the foam is toxic when it burns. So we weren't going to do that, obviously. So we had to use cold cutting techniques, 30,000 PSI water jets to cut holes in this steel. Then we dropped in 18,000 PSI, that's a lot, three-dimensional water blaster to pulverize the foam. And we cropped holes in the bottom to drop that foam out of those tanks. So altogether, we took out 325 cubic yard roll-offs full of foam. So bad joke number 5, we literally had a shipload of foam. And a big deal, very, very tough to get done. So some more shots just to show you how difficult this phase was. Again, all that area is just full of foam, and this is not easy to get out. So now this shot is exposed. We've opened up some of the inner structure, and you can see how deep these tanks are, and we've removed foam from here, but the foam, this entire tank, these are all filled with foam. But one of the things that you'll notice in the next few photos is, if all this steel was leaking, you can see that the condition of it, the framing was also in bad shape. So these tanks were very, very weak. So as we were water jetting and blasting all of that foam out of there, parts of the framing were flying out as well. It was actually dangerous. So again, some more shots of showing you. This is a tank, D12, which we had some special nicknames for this tank, but this was a very, very difficult tank, completely full of foam, a lot of damage. They had done a lot of repairs prior to coming down, but everything couldn't be done in the water. Some stuff can only be done on dry dock. Just some more shots of showing you the extent of the foam. I mean, that is all foam running 5 foot deep, 30 foot down. The ship is 573 feet long. I can't understate overstate how difficult this challenge was. So once the foam was removed, now we're able to analyze the condition of the existing steel. And you can see from these photos, the condition of the steel was not good. It's not supposed to look like that. So a lot of it had corroded away. And now granted, this was the outer skin, but the original side shell was in bad shape as well. So here's another shot on the starboard side forward, where we've begun to remove this outer layer of blister tanks, and that is the original side shell when it was launched in 1914. And these frames that run every 4 feet, much of that was corroded. We didn't have to crop that out, it was already gone. So we had to analyze the strength of this steel, and the engineer gave us guidelines. If it's a certain thickness, it's good, you can leave it alone. If it's between this and this, you have to lay a new layer of steel over it, and if it's less than something, you have to completely take it out and replace it. So we did a ultrasonic thickness gauging of the entire hull to see what we were dealing with. But I want to back up a step. I didn't really give you a good description about these torpedo blisters and why they're there and what their purpose was. So between World War I and World War II, torpedo technology really improved to where they could drop torpedoes not only out of a sub, but from an airplane. And these vessels are relatively slow and could be sunk quite easily. So the decision was made in 1927 to add a layer of tanks to the outside of the original hull. They're called torpedo blisters, and they're kind of like a bulletproof vest for the ship. And the idea would be that the torpedo would strike here and detonate and not reach the inner hull. Ultimately, the weapons manufacturers, they're not stupid either. They decided they could figure out a way to do a delayed fuse, and the torpedo could penetrate the outer skin and then get to explode. So these fell out of favor, but this is what the typical reaction was to the advance in technology in the 20s after World War I. So these were the primary culprit that were leaking. So another question was, well, why not just take them off altogether? Why do you have to put them back on? It's very expensive. Why not just go back to the way it was in World War I? So 2 reasons. One, the battleship was decommissioned after World War II. Everything you see is its World War II condition. All the things on the inside and the outside, the armaments and the towers, the guns, etc. But they could have said, well, why don't you do the part above the waterline that the public will see, why don't you keep that section and maybe just kind of cut it off right here, and then when it's back in the water, nobody will know. And that actually would have been a viable idea, and it was talked about. Problem is, the ship has a very, very deep draft. And so if we didn't come back and replace these torpedo blister tanks, we didn't have enough buoyancy to get off the dock and go. They didn't even know where their new home was going to be. We know now where we're going. But at the time, it wasn't clear, and the deeper your draft is, the harder it is to get into certain harbors and certain locations. So we needed the torpedo blisters to be rebuilt and provide that buoyancy. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to run through these very quickly. This is just kind of a time lapse of the process of tearing out all the foam, taking out all the bad steel, and then we begin to renew the good steel. So again, these are first stages of getting things exposed. In the stern on port and starboard, it was really, really bad. Unfortunately, not only were the torpedo blisters in bad shape, but the original hull and then the framing inside the hull required a lot of extra work that no one really knew for sure. It's the old remodeling thing. You open up the kitchen and you find out the damage is worse than you thought, and you have to deal with it. So the challenge for our client and their engineers were to decide what to leave in and what to leave out, and there were no easy decisions. So this is, again, this is D12 in the stern of the vessel, and this framing that comes it's every 4 feet, and it comes all the way down to the keel. When we opened up this section, all of these frames were not connected to the keel. Again, this is kind of technical, but that's called not a good thing. And so this all had to be rebuilt. And not all of that was anticipated. You can see that we put some shoring in here to support the vessel. But look at the condition of this steel inside those blister tanks. So this is probably the worst section of the vessel that had to be addressed. So here's we got to play some inspiring music now. Things are starting to look, up, right? And so here we are, we're doing some repairs, and you have new framing going in, and it's been blasted in a beautiful coat of marine epoxy, and then new framing going in. We've repaired the original side shell, and we're starting to make some momentum. So again, good steel plate going on, getting welded on the new framing, and we're rebuilding these blister tanks. Now this slide right here is in the excuse me, went the wrong way. So these slides are showing when we were able to build these modules for the blister tanks in our fabrication shop. They were large enough that we could build them in about a 20-ton section and then use a crane to hoist them up and weld it all out. The earlier slides, we had to build them what we call stick building. The area was too small to have a man fit inside to weld it out, so it made it much more difficult. So we're getting some efficiency here in building these modules, and just some other shots of what the modules look like inside. So remember how bad that steel was originally? And then here's this nice, beautiful module that we built in our fab shop that we hung with our crane, and now we're welding all of that out. Now, one of the things we were able to do, this vessel is never going to sail again. And we love it. We're very honored to be associated with it. But from a navigation and a shipbuilding perspective, this is just a barge shaped like a battleship. So it's not going to hit the high seas. So we were able to, the structure that we built is not identical to what was there. It doesn't need it, and cost is an issue. So one of the examples of that is these blister tanks were built with flat bottoms. The original blister tank bottom would have tapered nicely into the hull below where I'm showing you with my pointer. Well, they don't need it to be anything but for buoyancy, and so we made some modifications at the request of the client. It serves the purpose, and again, they had to make tough decisions, but the cliche of trying to ruin a good plan by making it a perfect plan applies here. They're being practical for what they have to work with. So that's an example. For those of you that have been out for the dry dock tour, that's something that was changed, but it have no impact on the visitor experience, but it gives them the buoyancy and the stability that they need. Okay, run through a few more. Now we're on the port side, kind of, I say port side deja vu, because just like we saw on the starboard side, tear all these tanks off, get rid of all the foam, analyze the steel, the stern is bad, fix all of that and move on. So here are some more shots of getting, and that's an up close on the port side, similarly bad to the starboard side, which I showed you earlier. And then here we are repairing all those internal frames that were behind that bad steel. We'll put new steel over this, and then we'll build the blister tank over that. So a multi-stage process, and here it is kind of, finished. So the blister tanks now, which were completely torn off, then they're completely rebuilt, and then all this new steel is laid over, and we're ready to go into paint mode. That's kind of exciting. So that's the end of the blister tank rebuild. This slide here is other areas in which we analyzed the steel, and it was in pretty good shape, but we had to lay a new layer of steel over it, and it's called a doubler. And much of the rest of the hull outside of those blister tanks was what's called doubled. And you lay a new piece on and weld it in place and you move on. Okay, a couple more shots about the damage. This is actually at the very, very aft end of the ship, and this is the keel, and you can see that there's some deformation here. And after we blasted the old coating off, we found that that had holes in it as well, and that's going to leak up into the ship. So this also had to be repaired. And this is just an example of what you're dealing with, 110-year-old steel. I mean, it's going to have holes in it. It's going to have been corroded. There's lots of things you have to deal with. So we laid new steel, of course, over top of this. I talked about the blister tanks. I talked about the areas where we could put new steel, but there were other areas of tanks that also had to be fixed. So we took off a section of steel, and this is underneath the ship. And this is what you're seeing. These frames, there's a lot of areas that are corroded here, so we had to repair this as well. And then we laid a new piece of steel over this section. So this is about a 4-foot section underneath the ship. Close-ups of inside of what you're dealing with. There was no way to know until you opened up that area. And again, there's a lot of corrosion, and this is hard to maybe see from your angle, but this is actually new steel that was put on in an earlier repair when it was up in San Jacinto. So we were taking some of the inner repairs that had been done and then melding it with our new repairs. And again, the engineer was providing guidance on how much we needed to do to close out that tank. Just a lot of areas that needed a lot of attention. And again, these are some of the worst, but you can see that original framing was just unfortunately in terrible condition. Okay, a few more to give you an idea of what we were up against. Okay, now we're underneath the ship, and this shot here is showing you original steel, a lot of pitting, and this is an example of a piece that was put on in the past as a patch, but we were coming back with a much more holistic approach. So there's an example of an after shot. So we were able to lay on large sections of new steel over that old steel that was heavily pitted, and that's called doubling. So a few more shots of that, and then now we're beginning to put our marine epoxy coating on. And you can see that here is some new steel, and we didn't get to put new steel everywhere that we wanted. Again, we had to make decisions. This steel was in pretty good shape. We thought we could retain it. This steel was not in good shape. We had to double it, and it's a decision that's made each section of the ship. The engineers and the customer get together and give us the direction on what they want to repair and how. Another shot underneath the ship, pretty tight conditions. Now, we said we finished all the steel work. We're laying this first layer of primer for the marine epoxy coating, and the next shots are just different angles of the after shot of applying this coating. This shot here is in preparation for the coating. We had to blast off the old coating. This is the old coating that was on, so we blast it down to bare metal, and then we're laying a nice new layer of primer on top of that. And everything we're doing is all from the deck edge down. We're not dealing anything with the superstructure at this point. That's in phase 2. So you saw in the earlier slides where we tore off the bad steel, and here's that nice, beautiful new steel. This was existing steel that was determined to be in good shape, so we were able to reuse that. A few minor patches, gets a nice clean sandblasting, and we're beginning to coat it with primer. Just some more shots of what that looks like. This is a primer coat, all black, and that kind of a cool shot at night. And then daytime, obviously, just different angles. Here we are at the stern. This section right here is actually original armor belt. This is cast anywhere from 7 to 12 inches thick, and that didn't need to be replaced. We put new steel up to it above and below based on the metal gaugings. So in World War II, when it was decommissioned, this is the color, Atlantic blue. It had been painted haze gray, it had camouflage patterns, but this is how it looked when it was decommissioned, and so that's what we restored it to. And this, the line is the anticipated water line, the black down, and then this is the Atlantic blue up. In phase 2, this will all be addressed. This will all get a beautiful new paint job as well, but you can do that pier side. You don't need to be in the water to work on the superstructure. So I'm going to run through a few more shots of the coating, which looks pretty cool. And we put the draft marks on, of course. And then number 35. So one of the things that we're doing right now, and I have a few slides later, we are doing some work on the superstructure, but we removed the 5-inch guns. There were 3 5-inch guns on each side, port and starboard, and these were the windows where they were located. The guns weigh 26,000 pounds apiece. It's a very tight workspace, and we just put the first of the 5-inch guns back on board. I have a photo to show you on that later, and then we'll be continuing to do work up in the superstructure. So there's a pretty good shot from a drone of the new paint job from the deck edge down. Another shot from the bow and the stern. And so this color, this Atlantic blue, will be, again, throughout the vessel. It looks faded up here, but that's all going to be blasted off and recoated as part of the restoration of the superstructure. So this is sort of the end of the dry dock phase. We've done all of the steel repair. The submerged hull has been repaired, and the rest of it can be done pier side. You don't need to be out of the water to do this repair. So the next phase is coming. We're getting ready to put the battleship back in the water, and it hasn't been announced the exact date, but it's pretty soon. So we finished up the hull coating, and you kind of get an idea of where it's sitting in our shipyard across from Galveston with the Carnival cruise ship behind it, right? So what else? 5-inch gun restoration. So I'm going to back up and show you that slide with the windows. So those windows right here, there's 3 per side, port and starboard. These are the starboard side. This slide is looking inside those windows. And these 5-inch guns rest on this base, and it's a wood base over a metal deck, and they're held in place by these 2-foot-long bolts, threaded bolts that are all rusted out. They're getting new ones. But all this area has been renewed. There was steel repair to do here, new wood to put in here in the 3 locations. And very difficult work environment. It's a very narrow window to get this 26,000 or 13-ton gun inside. So we broke it down in pieces. But the next thing we did was kind of fix this area up a little bit. And you notice nice, beautiful, brand new wood that's going in this foundation in each of them. And then we had the gun base, which has been, they were all sent to the Battleship Texas Foundation warehouse in Channelview. The guns and the bases were restored. Now they're ready. They brought them back to Gulf Copper, and we're going to install them. So the first step is the wood foundation. The second step is the gun base. And the third step is to lift this huge, this is only a 5-inch gun. Remember, the 14-inch guns topside are significantly larger. This is a 5-inch gun. So we're hoisting it up off the dry dock deck, and we put it inside the window. It's a lot harder than that, by the way. There'll be 3 per side, and then from the inside, this is the gun inside that spot number 2, and we've done metal repair here and done some nice new coatings. You notice this hasn't been done, that we're just focused on this area alone, and this wood deck is among the better wood deck on the vessel, but this will also get renewed as part of a future phase. So 5-inch guns, a big project that we have coming up as part of the non-submerged hull work. What else do we have to do? Well, we have to fix all the superstructure. Now the challenge is that the hull was leaking, salt water, not good, but the superstructure was leaking also. All these superstructure rooms, a lot of the roofs were leaking, so lots and lots of rainwater was getting into the battleship. So we pumped out a lot of rainwater along the way, and kind of a detective work to find out where it was coming from. So some shots here, we've got some scaffolding set up. We've done some repair in the superstructure, and it's difficult to access. Tight working conditions require scaffolding. And then we're also restoring some things that had been closed off in years past. So this is the forward fire control tower right here. And it has windows, and there's a circular section on top. And this is kind of a rectangular section here. Well, this structure is identical right here in the aft fire control tower. But years ago, it was leaking, so they just got rid of the windows and they covered it all up, and just so they wouldn't get rainwater inside the vessel. So we're restoring the aft fire control tower. It'll look just like this guy, and then they'll both look better because they'll get a beautiful coat of paint. But the next couple of shots are what that looks like. So a lot of stuff that we're doing, we're making plans, hand drawings. We don't have, there aren't usable architectural blueprints for us to go on. So this photo right here, this is Travis Davis. He's the VP of Operations for the Battleship Texas Foundation, and 2 of our best guys, and they're trying to figure it out. What are they going to do to restore this 110-year-old space that has been welded over with all kinds of hodgepodge repairs over the years? So I mentioned these windows. This used to have windows all in here, up on the circular section, and in here, and we're restoring that. So here's kind of the inside of that. We're getting ready to crop all that steel out. This is kind of what we inherited. The floors were rusted out, so we had to put new floors in, so we cropped that out. That's looking down towards the deck. That area has now been restored, okay? We should have cut that bar off 5 minutes earlier, and all good, all good. And so that before and after, we found this throughout. The floor was leaking, the roof was leaking, there's rainwater coming in, so all kinds of little repairs like this to do in order to fix this aft fire control tower, tight working conditions. And so here we've started to open it up. I mentioned these are the same structures. This one is just lower. So these windows are still intact. We're making it to where we can put these windows back in. Inside, opening it up. Now we've got the window framing to go. And now that round section is open, getting ready for framing to put the windows in. And the whole area, this used to have a piece of metal over it. It's all been opened up as part of the restoration. So we have a lot of work like this to do in phase 2. And that'll all be done once it comes off the dry dock and goes back pier side, because we don't need to be out of the water to do this. Some of it we were doing because we had some opportunity and some time, but the majority has not been done yet. So a few more shots of the superstructure. Eventually, the scaffolding will be built all the way to the top of the forward fire control tower, and all of it will get addressed. But you can see it's a little bit of a logistical challenge to get into, be able to fix these areas. It's not easily reached and difficult to get equipment up there. Just a few more shots to kind of show you what we're dealing with. And this area eventually will be scaffolded as well, and it'll get metal repair, it'll get blasted and coated, and then we'll get the scaffolding out of there and we'll turn it over to the Battleship Texas Foundation. What else? Well, this is probably the major thing, and just a couple of slides on this. But the plan is to restore the wood deck. And I have a couple of photos here to show you it's in really, really rough condition. And so there's a very, very specific requirement on how the wood deck is installed. And it's not just one of those things where you start in one corner and hope the seam, falls underneath the table in the corner. It's a very, very specific way that this wood has to be installed. There's about 80,000 metal studs holding these wood pieces in place. All that wood has to be removed. The metal deck has to be analyzed. We expect about 25% of it has to be removed or renewed. So new steel deck. Then the new metal studs that are threaded have to be welded in place, and then a hole cut in each piece of wood. The wood is laid over that, and then you put the nuts on those metal studs, and then you put a little wood plug in there, and then you coat it, and then you move on to the next section. Very, very difficult, very, very tedious, and this is a major thing for phase 2. So you can see in this photo the wood. This is wood where it's completely crumbled. None of this is salvageable. These metal plates are where it's a tripping hazard to walk along the deck. All of this has to go. This is where a lot of the anti-aircraft guns will come back and be installed, but they've all been taken off, along with all the interior memorabilia. You wouldn't leave your cherished belongings inside your house when you're having it remodeled. So they've all been taken off, and they're in storage at the Battleship's location, and eventually they'll come back on when they're ready to open up as a museum. Another shot of the wood deck from the opposite angle, and again, none of this is salvageable. So this is probably the biggest post-dry dock project that we'll be involved in, and that everyone's very excited about, but it won't happen until we come off the dry dock later this year. Let's see what else I have here. So this was in the Galveston Daily News. It's also on the Battleship Texas Foundation website. So this is the rendering of what we all are excited and hope to see at Pier 21. And so, they need to get a lot more visitors than they got up in San Jacinto. These are very expensive ships to maintain, and they hope to generate the kind of revenue to not only have a great visitor experience, but also to be able to pay for upkeep and do new capital projects. So this is a critical thing for them, but that's the rendering that currently exists. We don't know exactly how it will show, but that's what the goal is. And let's see what else I have. So that's the last slide I want to share with you before I take questions. This is just a cool shot that we're proud of over at Gulf Copper. You know, we have on our big dry dock, we have the 1914 Battleship Texas, and our small dry dock, we have the 1877 tall ship Alyssa. So that's pretty cool. And then we also have a working jackup rig that we did a huge project on that is out drilling for oil right now. So, you know, we do a little bit of everything, but this is a pretty cool phase that we're in at Gulf Copper. So I'm going to take a break and see if there's any questions from the floor. All right.
I've got one I've always wondered about. When it's a dry dock like that and it's sitting on your supports.
Yes.
How do you then do the area that's under the support?
Man, it's a great question. It's almost like I asked you to ask that question. So I need to go back a little bit, but rather than do that, I'm not going to flip through all the slides. So when those blocks, they're made out of concrete, and by design, we have a sandbox that is on top. It's a 6-inch sandbox. And when we're ready to work in that section, and if you do the math, there's about 200 tons sitting on each block. You can pop off one of the 2x6s that makes the sandbox, and then use a water jet to blast out that sand, and then you can remove the sandbox, and you have 6 inches of clearance. You can pull the block, you do the repair underneath the block, put the block back in place, and then you put wooden wedges, hardwood wedges, 100-ton hydraulic rams, pull them together, and now you've supported that section. So A+ for you, that's a good question. Okay, yes sir.
You mentioned not really knowing the condition of things until you open it up and look inside. What were some of the things that, had you seen, would have just made you shake your head and say, this is positive, and were you ever close to that?
Well, you know, our clients are here. I should put them on the spot and say that they answer that question, but I won't. But the thing is, it's not. Everyone knew there was damage, so nobody was going into it with rose-colored glasses. You just didn't know how far the damage went, and then what was going to be the risk-reward of the repair. And you know, could you say, look, that we don't really, that's never going to be part of the museum. We just need to stabilize that. You know, when's the next time it's going to be dry docked? So I use a lot of housing analogies. I think it's easier for everyone to understand. If I said to you, you're never, ever, ever going to be able to re-roof your house again, or you don't know when, you're like, man, I better do the 50-year metal roof. But if you think, no, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to be able to do it on a more regular basis, I'll do a standard architectural shingle roof. So they don't know the next time they're going to be able to dry dock the vessel. So do you do the repair like you're going into Armageddon, or do you do the repair based on an expectation you'll pull it out of the water every 10 years, which is what you might do under normal circumstances? So the challenge was, you know, what to do given an unknown future. Hope that kind of answers your questions. And then, but we always met, you know, you've got a naval architect and an engineer that are involved, making sure that at a minimum you're meeting all the structural requirements. And then beyond that, how much further do you go? Okay, I'll go this side. Yes.
Did I miss, or can you say what the cost is today for this?
Oh gosh, there's not really. I would give you a straight answer, but really it depends on how you break it down. Because there's this phase at Gulf Copper, but there was all the work at San Jacinto to get it down here. Then there's all the work that has to be done across the way. For example, so ultimately I'm not going to answer your question, by the way, but I'm going to give you some good information. Like the cost to go to Pier 21. So the pilings that were up in San Jacinto aren't stout enough to hold it in place during a hurricane in Galveston. They have to make new ones, stronger ones. They have to drive them deeper. They don't know exactly what all the costs are going to be. So, and even within our project, just like in that remodeling example, you open up the kitchen, hey, I found some termite damage, I found a little water damage. So what do you want to change? Well, all right, you know what, I'm going to get a little bit less expensive appliance package. So they're making decisions on the fly based on new information. And so exactly how much they're going to spend, it really isn't known yet because they haven't finished everything. And so they may spend a little bit more on the wood deck or a little bit less based on how this phase works out. But the numbers you see in the paper, you know, you know, it's the state, you know, allocated in the 2023 legislative session, for example, an additional 25 million. Now that was for that was for everything. That's not for necessarily the ship. And then in 2019 it was 35 million. But again, a lot of things were, you know, being addressed with that money, not just the hull repair.
Speaking of the wood deck, is any of that original?
My understanding is no, that that wood deck was replaced most recently about 40 years ago, give or take. Yeah, okay. And that wood deck is pine, by the way, and the new deck is going to be pine as well, long leaf pine. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there ways to use like dividing protection to help minimize any corrosion?
Absolutely, yeah. And so we haven't done anything with that yet. That's not necessarily part of our scope. But the answer is yes. And so some of the stuff the Battleship Foundation and Valcor they're doing on their own. The shipyard is primarily focused on the steel repair and the coatings, for example. Okay. Yes.
From an economic development perspective, about how many welders work on this project per day, and what do they average paying per day?
So, you know, our average head count, I would say, you know, including yard services and all that, is about 65. And I can tell you that, you know, project to date, over 220,000 hours has been put into this project. And, you know, with overtime, all of our welders are ABS certified. So that's a Marine Environment, American Bureau of Shipping welder. And, you know, with overtime and so on and so forth, you know, they're going to make certainly more than double the prevailing wage in Galveston, that's for sure. But on an annualized basis, probably between $70,000 and $80,000 a year. Yes, sir.
When they were pulling the steel off all those compartments and stuff, did they find any cool artifacts?
I don't think so. We didn't find. I'm not aware of any, or if they did, no one told me. One guy did retire to the south of France, but I'm not sure what happened there. But no, the thing is too, the foundation, they know this ship inside out. They can tell you they've crawled inside these tanks lots and lots of times, because when it was at San Jacinto, they weren't just hanging out. They were investigating what was happening. Some of it was they were pumping these tanks out to make sure that they were staying as dry as they could. But no big discoveries. One thing on the foundation's website, they did a restoration of a pretty cool painting that was up, I forget the exact space, but it had been covered over, but they restored, it was a really neat map of the world. It's chronicled on the Battleship Texas Foundation website. It's pretty cool. But again, as far as even us being inside, the vast majority of the memorabilia and the displays and all of the things of value were taken off to either be restored or protected. And part of what they're doing, you know, they're gonna have a brand new visitor experience. They're gonna have some of the old stuff, of course, but it's gonna be a state-of-the-art experience with, of course, applications and some holograms and all kinds of things that you would expect in, you know, the newest way to display and show the visitor what it was like to be on board these vessels in World War I and World War II. Other questions? Okay.
You mentioned that you did not have the original design drawing for this?
Yes and no. I mean, there were original drawings, but they're not in AutoCAD. You know, they're not. You can't take them and say, oh, let me just scan them, and then AI is gonna. So it wasn't like you could just. A lot of it was had to be done on site, inscribed, and just, you know, and even those blister tanks, we couldn't. Yeah, we had a general design to build, but the original hull has shape to it, of course, but it's not totally flat and smooth like it was. So you had to scribe and make adjustments with these huge pieces of modules on the side of the ship. Yeah. Yes. All right. All right.
Considering the amount of time this has been at San Jacinto bottom part of the ship has been in the water with pumps running 24 hours a day that we tourists never saw.
Right.
When this thing was pulled in dry dock, did you have it? There were blocks all up and down the ship. How in the world did you find good steel to block the thing up?
There were a few prayers being said the night of the docking, I can tell you that. But, so the dry dock itself has structure. So just like this, there's structural things within this solarium. So we knew the structure of the dry dock, and we knew the structure of the battleship. And so those blocks were placed where we knew there was a structural frame. That wasn't a random haphazard, make it look pretty. It was like, no, it needs to be here, 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 a certain spot. And then there are things called docking keels. And again, it would be analogous to changing a tire on your car. There's places where the manufacturer tells you to put the jack. Docking keels are places where you put the blocks. So we had that information. It's a good question. Okay.
So what are you doing with a lot of the materials that you're having to take off or discard from the project?
I'll be selling some from the back of my car later on tonight. Special deals. So all of the steel, anything belongs to the Battleship Texas Foundation, and they have a very robust souvenir program. Wood grips from the deck for a Colt 45, pieces of steel that are, machined and cut into different things, all kinds of stuff. And it's a significant fundraising event, knives made from Battleship Texas steel. So we crop it off, we palletize it, and we send it to their warehouse. And occasionally one falls off the truck, maybe, I don't know. But, we'll see about that. So, yes, ma'am. Not in Galveston Bay, don't worry. So, no, but so we're a certified facility for dealing with the hazards that come off of a vessel. And but there's a very specific landfill that can take that type of foam, and so it was all sent to that landfill. Pardon me? Oh, I'm sure, because we paid the bill, and yeah, absolutely, and very expensive. Yes, sir, in the back.
I just want to make a comment. My name is Salvador, and we're the general contractor. And when we committed to the legislature in the state to save the Battleship Texas, we needed some strong bones, some proud Texan companies to come on forward. We actually were not contractually obligated to live in Texas, spend any of the money here. We could have taken it internationally. We looked at all the options, but it wasn't until Woody Band, Golf Golfer, and I'm very proud to tell you guys that every dollar that we have spent from our taxes is being going through Texas companies, Texas services, employees, and everywhere I go, I cannot try to run to explain it because it's a lot of millions of dollars. Not enough yet, though. There's a lot of still to raise, but every dollar that we have received from the state of Texas, we found a way to spend it in the state.
Right on. Right.
Okay, I think we could probably go on for a lot more questions, and Dave may be willing to hang out in the back and answer a few more questions, but I think we're gonna call it since it is a little bit after 6:30. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you, Dave.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. All right.